Hey players, when it comes to school stress, it's no joke. Whether you're worrying about a big test coming up, graduating from your school, or getting in lots of trouble for something you did, it's important to know how to effectively manage these situations. I was talking to tbyram57 on Snapchat when he asked me to do a video on school stress, so I figured I'd share 5 super stressful school moments for me and what I learned from them.
This is the Just Me. Watching the Just Me.
I'd like to take you back to the 6th grade, when little 6th grade Josh had braces and didn't know how to speak up for himself whenever times were tough. I was always too nervous to talk to my crushes, to people that weren't my immediate friends, and of course to just speak up in class. I would never raise my hand, I would never make a fuss, I would just kind of go to class, sit there, listen, write the notes, and then just be on my way. Now, I never had a problem like this in elementary school because I was always a lot closer to the board, but in my 6th grade science class, I ended up sitting somewhere very far in the back. And that's when I started to realize it was taking me a lot longer to write what was on the board because I spent most of my time sitting there and just squinting to try to read it. It got even more frustrating when at times I was in the middle of writing only for the teacher to say, "Okay, is everyone done?" For me to not speak up and then for him to erase the board. I didn't want to draw attention to myself by raising my hand and saying, "Hey, I'm not done writing it because I can't really see the board." I thought everyone would laugh at me and make fun of me. This was super stressful for me because every time I didn't finish copying the notes, that pit in my stomach that told me, "Hey, you need to know this material or else you're gonna fail," grew larger and larger. Now what he did next pushed me in the right direction, but he did it in the worst of possible ways. He squatted down next to my desk so the two of us were eye level, and he looked at the board with me and then started squinting saying, "What, you can't see the board? Why don't you just say something?" And of course at that point everyone stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to me, and I just kind of sunk in my chair. I felt so embarrassed and didn't know what to do. I told him I had trouble seeing the board and he just responded with, "Well, why don't you just get glasses then?" So I went home, told my parents what happened, and after seeing the optometrist, he decided that I just needed glasses for the classroom. So I got glasses so I can see what was on the board. From that moment forward, I could see the board, I can copy my notes, it wasn't stressful for me anymore. But I feel like the big lesson that I learned was if something was bothering me or stopping me from learning, I had to speak up about it. Sometimes we cause ourselves unnecessary stress by never talking about what's really bothering us. And that's why it's so important to tell a teacher, tell a parent, talk to someone about what you feel you're struggling with. But there may be times where the thing that's causing you stress is something you know you can't talk about, which is exactly what happened in my photography class. In my junior high school, we had a darkroom where after taking photos on a non-digital camera, we had to go into the darkroom to develop them. Between the classroom and the darkroom, there's usually a little room that you go into which has 2 doors. The purpose of the 2 doors is so that you can close the first door once you go in and open the second without letting any natural light go into the darkroom. Normally, when the class was in the darkroom developing their pictures, our teacher would just sit on the outside in the classroom, so we could talk about whatever we wanted and we knew she couldn't hear us. This, of course, led to all kinds of conversations that we did not want the teacher to hear. People would curse, people would say sexual things, it was just a madhouse. But one day in particular, I remember talking to one of the kids in the class thinking that the teacher wasn't there, and he asked me, "Hey, do you think she's a virgin?" And I responded with, "Of course she is. She never talks about a boyfriend or a husband." Keep in mind, I'm a 7th grader talking about sex with no experience of it at all. And as we're openly talking about how we think she's a virgin, other kids are looking at us like, "Guys, stop." And that's when we realized she was in the dark room with us. She turned around, walked over to us and said, "What are you guys talking about exactly?" And me and my friend just froze. I looked at her, she looked at him, he looked at me, then we looked at her, and then he responded with, "Oh no, we were wondering if you were a Virgo." And I ran with it and said, "Oh yeah, we were wondering what your birthday month was. Are you a Virgo?" Now I knew that she knew that we weren't talking about that, but she played it off like we were. And from that moment forward, the stress started to sink in. I started to worry then, is she gonna look at me differently? Is this gonna affect my grade? Does she secretly hate me? I knew it was something I could never talk to her about because she was a teacher, but the stress was eating me alive, not knowing whether or not she actually knew what we were talking about. To this day, I still don't know. But the learning lesson for me here was be mindful of what you're saying and who you're saying it about. I created unnecessary stress for myself just because I wanted to make fun of the teacher, and that was something that I realized is not worth doing. If I can go back in time and apologize, I would, but Sometimes teachers don't stick around long enough, which is exactly what happened in my next story. My 8th grade English teacher was a bit obese. In fact, I remember a time where she dropped a pen off of her desk and she couldn't even reach down to get it. She had to ask me to go over to her desk and pick it up for her. Granted, this of course brought on a ton of fat jokes from the kids in the class, which were not cool to make, but couple that with the fact that she had somewhat of a bad attitude sometimes, it made it feel like it was okay to make fun of her. I didn't have a problem with her, but I didn't like the fact that she was impatient about certain things. When kids would take too long to do stuff, she would kind of yell at them for it. I remember specifically a time where we were reading West Side Story in the classroom, and the final project was to act out a scene from the book. My friend and I were huge wrestling fans at the time, specifically for Rikishi and Too Cool. So we decided we were going to do our own version of the Jets vs. Sharks song, incorporating moves from Too Cool. We thought this was the coolest thing in the world. We were going to do the Too Cool dance in front of the classroom set to the song from West Side Story. This was awesome. We were practicing on Friday because our performance was set to be on Monday, and everyone else in the class was doing their own thing too, and you could just hear the teacher in the background somewhat yelling at kids for taking too long or doing things wrong. Well, as the weekend came along, I got a text from my friend which I thought initially was a joke, saying that our teacher passed away. I was a little thrown off here. What did he mean she passed away? Was he joking around? Was this something passing around the school to make fun of her? I didn't really know until Monday morning when I went to school. It turned out that over the weekend she had a heart attack and passed away, and I remember sitting there in the auditorium with the rest of the school as the principal explained it, along with the teacher's daughter who also went to our school. She was standing there in tears talking about her mother, and I remember sitting there in my chair being super stressed out, wondering, what's gonna happen now? They eventually brought in a substitute teacher, but things just weren't the same with her. I think everyone in the class felt that, but we just went along with it because we had to finish the school year. And I remember the principal saying that if anyone needed to talk to someone, a teacher, a counselor, someone, about how they were feeling, they could always do it at any time throughout the day, but I just felt too nervous to actually take him up on that offer. Instead, I sat there class after class, confused, worried, and stressed out, not knowing what to make of everything that happened. And I think what I learned from that experience is that if something tragic happens that's causing stress in your life, it's okay to stop your work to talk to someone about it. That's way more important in that moment. Talking to a teacher about how I was feeling was something I felt I never wanted to do growing up, especially when I entered high school and the work started getting harder. This happened to me in my 9th grade biology class and my 10th grade chemistry class. Every time I took a test in either one of those classes, I always feared the result. I don't know what it was about taking tests in those two classes. Something about the Scantron made me feel off. The fact that some of the multiple choice answers were so similar it was hard to tell the difference. There were a lot of factors at play. And it's not like I didn't try. I would always pay attention in class, read the book, and study my notes, but every single time the teacher handed back a test that I didn't do well on, he gave me that look that was like, son, I'm disappointed. What I found kind of annoying was that he handed back each person's test one by one. So of course, as that person got their Scantron, you would see the look immediately on their face whether or not they did good or bad. So whenever he gave me my test back, I would always have to pretend like I did good and put a smile on my face, but deep down I knew my grade was not what I wanted to get. And every single time, this was insanely stressful for me. Eventually, I realized I was just one of those students that needed tutoring in these subjects. I always felt like if I asked my parents to get me a tutor, it'd be a burden on them because they'd have to spend money to do it, or if I asked for help in school, people would think that I'm just not smart enough to understand the material. So instead, I carried that load of stress, worrying about my tests each and every single time, faking it in front of everyone. And that was stress I could have worked to prevent having had I simply done something about it, had I been proactive and talked to my parents, or talked to a teacher, or seeked out help in some way. Sometimes though, we're lucky enough to have a teacher step in and take interest in helping us succeed, which is exactly what happened in my next story. As I said before, my strategy was always just to coast on by. I would go to class, I would never raise my hands, I would take my tests, and I would move on. But one teacher in particular put a huge emphasis on participation, and that was something I took for granted that first time that I had him. Anytime you would raise your hand to ask or answer a question, he would mark it down in his notebook. So of course, by the end of that quarter, I had 0 there because I did neither of those things. My grades were pretty good, but they could have been a lot better had I actually participated. And that was something he made sure to pull me over to the side and tell me. One day after class, he pulled me over to his desk and showed me my grades. He showed me that I had no participation marks, and that of course made me feel very anxious. I remember him saying to me, "Josh, I know you're a bright kid, and I know you know the answers to these questions. Why not just raise your hands and try to answer them?" And honestly, I didn't have a response. I didn't know what to say. There really wasn't a reason why I couldn't be more active and participate. I guess to some degree, I was just afraid of maybe being wrong. He told me that he didn't want to see my grades so low because of something like participation. So at that point, I knew I had to step it up. And I remember as we entered that new quarter, the stress of doing something different, of just raising my hand and answering a question. Everyone in my class was doing it normally, so I guess they didn't see a problem with it like I did. But I do remember the first time I did raise my hand, I looked him in the eyes and he was smiling because he knew that I was finally taking that initiative. From that point on, I would raise my hand whenever I thought I knew the answer. I was more active in the class, and I feel like by being more active, I was learning better. It felt good knowing that by participating, I was going to get a better grade, and suddenly that stress of raising my hand just immediately went away. By the end of that quarter, I did a whole lot better in that class simply because I was more engaged, and the teacher made sure to tell me how proud of me he was. So I think the lesson I learned there was to not be afraid of failing. Even if I got something wrong, I was learning in the process. What do you guys think? What's something about school that's really stressing you out? Is it your finals week? Is it graduating? What's bothering you? Leave it in the comments below and we'll talk about it. Day by day, we're moving further and further into the summer. I want you to know that I'm proud of you for everything that you've done this year, for working hard, for challenging yourself, for being your best self. Keep up the good work, guys. As always, love and peace.